ANM News, and this is Abhijit Nandi Mazumdar once again on a very interesting and important topic. Climate change and now global warming, both intertwined together. I have with me Additional Chief Secretary Mr. Krishna Gupta, expert on climate change and global warming. My first question that I want to shoot to Mr. Gupta. What is the basic science of climate change and why are you worried about global warming?
Okay. So thank you for having me on this show. See, the basic science of climate change has been known to us for a long time. The greenhouse effect essentially is what? It is basically as a result of economic growth or anthropogenic activity. Humans burn fossil fuels, which results in the emissions of greenhouse gases, 75% of which is carbon dioxide and the others are methane and others, which traps heat, right? The greenhouse gas effect is basically it traps heat and leads to global warming, and that is actually a good thing because it makes the earth habitable, otherwise it would have been really cold. The problem arises when the concentration of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases in the air goes beyond certain limits or goes beyond what can be managed by natural sinks. What are natural sinks? The oceans, the forests. Most of the carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases emitted as a result of anthropogenic activity, which is basically industries, transport, agriculture, management of cities, basically urban development. Most of these activities are run on some kind of energy. Predominant form of energy was basically fossil fuel burning, basically coal and oil. And this leads to the emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, as we know. And you have to here make a distinction between flows and stocks. So what is emitted in a year is the flow of these greenhouse gases, but they add to the stock because greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So whatever the stock is, that is a more important variable or a parameter, and so flows, if they increase, the stock becomes really large, and it is the stock of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases which leads to higher temperature. If there is too much of greenhouse gas, obviously global warming will become adverse, and which leads to climate change, which in turn affects peoples and plants and agriculture, and there will floods, droughts, and you see this happening all over the world. The California fires of earlier this year, events like landslides and massive flooding in Uttarakhand, Himachal, incessant rain in Mumbai, Kolkata, in this part of the world and in other parts of the world. So these extreme weather events are rising as a result of climate change, which has been caused by global warming. So essentially, that's the science. Basically, focus around the carbon cycle.
So what are the various economic issues surrounding climate change? Okay.
So now there are various ways to look at it. It is the economic activity which in the first instance is leading to high levels of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide, right? And this in turn comes back to impact these very economic activities which I just told you about in a loop, right? Now, what are the economic questions? What does economic theory tell us? Basically, Samuelson's theory of public goods informs our discussions here. Controlling global warming is what is known as a global public good. What is a public good? That is a good which everybody can enjoy without paying for it. So in parlance of economics, public goods have two characteristics. One is non-excludability, that means you cannot exclude anybody from enjoying the benefits, and non-rivalry, that means if I consume an extra unit of the good, I don't reduce your consumption. So, these two characteristics are very, very applicable to the problem of global warming, and which is, so controlling global warming is a global public good. Now, the other way to look at it is that this is an externality, it is a negative externality. Global warming is an externality. So, what does that mean? Warming is happening because of the action of some industries, but the impact is being felt outside of this individual. It is causing an externality which is not beneficial to the society at large. So, to control negative externalities or any externality, governments often step in with economic policies. What are the possible economic policies? Possible economic policies are fiscal intervention. So, you can have tax on any carbon emission, on carbon. So, what A.C. Pigot, a very famous economist, called the polluter pays principle. So, whoever is polluting pays, and that is what has become the basis of any economic intervention that many governments are intending to take. The other way to look at it is, the other way an economic policy intervention might happen is a cap and trade mechanism, which the Europeans are doing, some parts of China, some states in the US. So, basically what happens is that you set a cap of emissions and then distribute permits to the various people or industries who are going to be using fossil fuels and emitting, and once and each one of them also gets a quota that you cannot emit more than this, and everything then totals up to the total cap, and then you trade. I mean, if there is an industry which has emitted more than its assigned quota, then it has to buy a trading permit from somebody else who has emitted below the quota, and then there is a market which leads to the market discovered price of carbon. So, cap and trade is doing well, it is operational in EU. How well it is doing is debatable, but so this is a way, another way. The third way in which economic policy interventions can happen is through the setting of standards or regulations. So, you can have regulations for mileage for petrol driven or diesel driven cars, or their emission controls, or you can have a program or a calendar for shifting from petrol and diesel driven vehicles to electric vehicles, and so on and so forth. So, that is incentivization to move to electric vehicles. So, tax, subsidy, cap and trade, regulation and standards. So, those are the broad economics of economic policy interventions that are possible. Before I move on to the next question, I would also like to add here that climate change is a fairly complex phenomenon. There are many geophysical processes going on. There is a lot of science informing the various reports that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has brought out, what are known as assessment reports. So, there have been 6 assessment reports since the beginning, I think, and they are basically driven by science, and they tell us that this much, they do simulation studies and so on and so forth. They tell us this much carbon stock has, the carbon stock in the world has risen to this much, and this is how much the global warming has happened, this is the impact on agriculture. So, there are studies on mitigation, adaptation and so on and so forth. So, economists have also sort of tried to marry the science and economics. William Nordhaus was the first, probably, yes, he got the Nobel in 2018 for his work, for what is known as DICE models, Dynamic Integrated Climate and Economy models, where the science and the economics is married into a macroeconomic model. And these models have then led to policy prescriptions as well, that this is the target you should be having, this is the warming target you should be having, this is what you should be doing to reach that target, and so on. So, William Nordhaus was the driver, a pioneer Another very important landmark in the economic policy management of global warming was a report by Sir Nicholas Stern, who was advisor to the Prime Minister of UK. He got out the Stern Review in 2006, which was basically a document, it's a 700-page document, which was an advisory policy document to the government of UK to advise them on what policies to undertake. So these two people essentially are leading climate economists, and their contributions stand out.
Absolutely. But here you mentioned about carbon taxes and emission trading. How does carbon taxes and emission trading help in climate change?
Okay. So as I said, this is a very old prescription which was first propounded by an economist called A.C. Pigou, who said that anybody who causes pollution has to pay for it. Obviously, the context was not what we see today, the massive amounts of pollution. Pigou was writing in the early 20th century, and at that time the pollution was, as they saw it, was very different from what it is today. But the principle remains that if you have to control carbon in the economy, in the atmosphere, there has to be a disincentive to use carbon. So now, if there is a disincentive, the best way to do it is to tax it. And if you tax it, the price of carbon, if there is a high carbon content in a good, the price will go up and the demand will fall, and there will be less production and so on. So carbon taxes that way are a way to drive carbon out of the economy and out of the ultimately out of the atmosphere. And this is what William Nordhaus has also, his policy prescription is taxes, and so has Nicholas Stern. Most economists agree that carbon taxes is a good way of controlling ultimately the carbon in the system, in the economy, and ultimately the atmosphere. And cap and trade, as I said, is a market based intervention. So it's not perfect, but it still gives you a price for carbon. Ultimately, when policymakers sit down and say that I want to price carbon, I want to tax, they need a number. So a cap and trade mechanism is a good way to get you that number. So it varies from market to market. Apparently in the EU, the current cap and trade price discovered for carbon is, I think, around $100 per carbon dioxide equivalent, per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's how you try and control carbon content in the atmosphere through cap and trade and carbon taxes.
Okay, but then how do you think subsidies to countries will help achieve the goal of climate change?
Okay, so now international negotiations on climate change are held under the aegis of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, under which Conference of Parties meet every year. One of the issues that has been a sticking point is climate finance. Climate finance basically is a mandate to raise a certain amount of finances for various adaptation measures which have to be given to developing countries. Now, this is a consequence of the principle of common but differentiated responsibility that India and other developing countries have been harping on in the various international negotiations and under the Conference of Parties. This transfer will help developing countries adapt to the various extreme climate events that are resulting from global warming and climate change. The most affected areas in the world remain the most poorest areas. So, South Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, the Pacific Islands, all these are very they are much poorer than the West, and all the pollution even today is happening in the Western world. Of course, China is the leading polluter, but otherwise the US and Europe are still using tons and tons of millions of tons of fossil fuels, and the pollution and the emission is happening in the rich countries, but the worst impacts are in the poor countries, which is why climate finance and the negotiations there, and it is agreed that there should be money for transferring to developing countries to undertake adaptation activities.
Then what is net zero and what are countries doing to deal with net zero?
So, okay, so good question, Abhijit. So, in the Paris Agreement, all countries agreed after much negotiations that there has to be an agreement where all countries come to the table, and all countries, including developing countries, set a timetable and put it on the table that yes, we are going to do this, this, this. So that's how it evolved, and it was agreed that every country should give us a date by which when it will become net zero. Net zero means that the amount of emissions that you produce are equal to the amount of emissions that you are offsetting or not producing. It does not stop all emissions. It is only saying that the amount of emissions you are producing will be equal to or less than the amount of emissions you have avoided or you are offsetting. Various countries have taken commitments through what is known as NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and every country has to file this at the UNFCCC and say that this is what we are going to do. We are going to become net zero by this year. Our energy intensity is going to go down by this much. We are moving to renewables in a big way, and we will have this much installed capacity by this time, and so on and so forth. This is there in NDCs. India also has filed their nationally determined contributions report in 2022, as have other countries. Apart from the US, of course, the US walked out of the Paris Agreement when Trump was re-elected. If you recall, when Biden was elected president, he joined the Paris Agreement. Before that, Trump had walked out. Now Trump has come back and is again walked out of the Paris Agreement. So net zero essentially is that countries will determine the time or year by which they will be producing emissions equivalent to what they are offsetting, and the EU has set a year 2050 for itself to become net zero. India has volunteered that it will become net zero by 2070, so that's what net zero is.
Okay, so India by 2070, Europe by 2050, that's what the target is. So
Yes.
Lastly, I just want to ask you whether do you think these targets are achievable and the countries are moving towards achieving this target?
Okay. Now, this is a debatable question because there is no strong audit going on of what each country is doing. But to achieve net zero will require a lot of effort. It will require a lot of effort across sectors. The way we produce our goods, the way we move, the way we live, the way we cool our surroundings or heat our surroundings, the way we do our agriculture, the way we get energy, everything has to change. So let me just break this down for you a little further. So for energy, that's the largest sort of fossil fuel user in the world, coal and oil. We have to move to renewables in a big way and also storage. We know that wind and solar are basically intermittent sources. So you will have wind power only when the wind blows. You will have solar power only when the sun shines. So obviously you cannot have 24/7 power like coal and oil give us. So what do? You can have storage. So move to wind and solar and other renewables in a big way, including nuclear, and also massive storage capacities for this energy. So that's the way we should be looking at the energy markets and the electricity. And then for this, the following the related developments in grid management have to come in. Transmission. So solar and wind energy plants happen to be in remote areas. The power has to be evacuated through transmission lines. So that has to be set up. So it's a huge challenge. The energy sector itself is a huge challenge. Come to transport. Transport, we have to move from the internal combustion engine to a battery driven cars, for which you will need massive charging infrastructure. You will need to give subsidies, continuous subsidies for use and production of electric vehicles, and ultimately we have to set a target for ourselves that all vehicles by this time will be electric driven. And this India has done, many other countries have done. In fact, China is a leader. More than 50% of their vehicles on the road are electric driven. Within transport, of course, there are bigger challenges like trucks, buses, shipping, but the biggest of them all is aviation. One can't imagine a huge plane being driven by batteries. The only possible way to, the only alternative fuel in aviation can possibly be hydrogen, green hydrogen, but that's some years away. So some economists are saying that we should cut down on air travel. For example, Dieter Helm, the British economist, and should invest more in rail networks, and so on and so forth, electric mobility, and aviation should be cut down. Only for long hauls aviation should be undertaken. For short hauls you should use other transport. So we've covered energy, transport, urban areas. So we have to retrofit buildings so that there is more usage of natural lighting. We have to change bulbs to LEDs, and the energy intensivity of buildings in urban areas has to come down. This has happened. Many famous buildings, the most famous example is of course the retrofitting of the Empire State Building, and apparently I believe that the electric bills have fallen to less than half of what they were earlier because of this retrofitting. So we talked about energy, transport, urban, agriculture. We have to move away from intensive use of fertilizers. We have to let the carbon back into the soil and go to more environmental friendly agricultural ways. Let the soil breathe. So each sector has to have a paradigm shift in the way we do things.
That's quite a task. Thank you very much for talking to us, Mr. Krishna Gupta.
My pleasure.
It's a very interesting topic, and we'll keep on coming back to you on this topic in the near future. Thank you very much for watching ANM News. Thank you.
আরও খবরের আপডেট পেতে সাবস্ক্রাইব করুন আমাদের ইউটিউব চ্যানেলটি আর বেল আইকনে ক্লিক করুন নোটিফিকেশনস পেতে।